It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Welcome in. May the 4th be with you, everybody. It is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show right here on the Better Sports Network. So excited that you are joining us this evening, watching. The draft has washed over us. Free agency is pretty much done, and we are on to the meat of drafting season. We've had our appetizer. We've had the mac and cheese. We've had the collard greens, and now we're on to that brisket, baby. And it is going to be so much fun over the next several months until the NFL kicks off in September. I am Eric Balkman from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, the FFPC, and of course, this show, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, right on here at Better Sports Network. Want to welcome in my co-host tonight, Pat Fitzmaurice, at Fitz_FF, from Fantasy Pros at Fantasy Pros on Twitter. Thank you, sir, so much for joining me tonight. I'm excited to chop up this NFL draft aftermath with you.
Yes, Eric. Very excited to be here with a fellow Wisconsin native. You alluded to barbecue foods. I feel like it should be bratwurst, deep fried cheese curds.
So we've had the coleslaw. Trying to think of everything else for a Friday. We've had the coleslaw. We've had the rye bread. Now we're on to the deep fried perch. That's my go-to.
Yes.
My son prefers walleye. I'm more of a perch guy. I go back and forth on it. And of course I like the warm German potato salad too. That's one of my favorites.
Yes. Yeah. Man, I have had recently, I think walleye just overtook perch in my fish fry ranking. Really close call up. Mm-hmm. They're both fantastic. But man, it's great to join you. And believe it or not, after this show, I'm rolling right into my home league, my home Dynasty League rookie draft. So this is a big night, Eric. I'm excited.
Hopefully we don't it's one of those things where think long, think wrong, where we talk about it for 2 hours and then we end up, you talk yourself out of making a certain rookie pick. What pick do you have tonight in your rookie draft? Assuming as good as you are, it's got to be 12, right?
No, I was going to be picking 109. I actually traded out of the first round I picked up an extra second and I recouped a 2024 second. I foolishly traded away that pick in a bad deal. So I wanted to get back in since it seems like next year's rookie draft is going to be really good, although I kind of thought that one about this year's rookie draft too, and then wasn't quite as excited as I had been a year ago.
Why did Pat trade out of the first round? We're going to get to that coming up on the program tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to get here's what's coming up on the show. Basically, your menu today. We are looking at some news and notes of stuff that's going around the league, not necessarily from draft, but we're going to talk a little bit about Jerry Jeudy. We're going to talk about DeAndre Swift. We're going to talk about the Bills receivers a little bit. Then we're really going to break down this draft. We're in the second segment. We're going to unpack the fantasy value for a lot of the guys that are going to be going in the first round of Pat's rookie draft and your rookie draft that went on day one of the NFL draft. In hour number 2, we're going to branch that off into day 2 and day 3, get into some Zach Evans, Chase Brown conversation, some Jalen Hyatt, Michael Wilson conversation. We'll obviously touch on the Packers tight ends and then Darnell Washington, the free fall there. We'll get into that. And then in the final segment, this is the one you really want to make sure you don't miss. It's Dynasty Rookie Draft Prep. We're going to talk about whether you should be drafting for need, drafting for talent. How do you balance those out? Where is the talent drop-off in the first round this year? What do we think about drafting running backs, receivers, and tight ends the same way the NFL drafted running backs, receivers, and tight ends? We'll get into some draft strategy. That's all coming up before we turn things over to Garrett Price and the Dynasty Nerds coming up at 9 p.m. Eastern time tonight. Remember, you can win $1 million in the inaugural Fantasy Pros Championship, just a $350 entry fee at myffpc.com. You register by June 1st and draft by June 15th. You get a free $35 league credit. If you want to do it up to 3 times, you'll get 3 credits. And Pat, I got to tell you, you guys over at Fantasy Pros right now, I was messing around on there. You have the mock drafts, and then once you complete a mock draft, there's a link. If you get the juices flowing, there's a link right to the Fantasy Pros Championship at myffpc.com. So it's all happening, man. You warm up on the Fantasy Pros site, and then you try to win $1 million for real on the FFPC site. It's the way to do it.
Yeah, our developers are awesome, and our mock draft tool, I'm convinced it's the best in the business. But we're really excited to partner with FFPC. I mean, you guys have long been the leaders in high stakes fantasy, and I think it's going to be a great partnership. We're super excited about it.
It's going to be awesome. And without further ado, let's get in to some of the players that you'll be drafting in the Fantasy Pros Championship, or maybe not. And what better way than to have a couple of Wisconsin natives kick things off with a guy. Actually, this kind of fits you, Pat. You used to be in Wisconsin, and now you're leaving. You left Wisconsin for Illinois. Well, Aaron Rodgers and Randall Cobb, they were in Wisconsin, and now they've left Wisconsin for, I guess, New Jersey, but technically the New York Jets here. Cobb joins the Jets here from the Packers. Now, I guess my question to you is not necessarily about Randall Cobb. This is a guy that we thought was going to be more impactful. At least I thought he was going to be more impactful on third downs this past year. And he really wasn't. He goes to the Jets. They just have, a cavalcade of receivers here. Now, we don't need to necessarily get into Garrett Wilson because that dude is an absolute stud, and he's being drafted as such in the early second round of Fantasy Pros drafts right now. But you look at some of the other guys they got there with, Mecole Hardman, with Alan Lazard, coming over, Randall Cobb now there as well. What is Corey Davis still doing on this team? When you take Garrett Wilson out of the conversation, are there any other Jets receivers that you're kind of bullish on this year with Aaron Rodgers tossing the rock?
Pretty much not, Eric. I think it's really just Garrett Wilson. And doesn't this Randall Cobb thing feel like cronyism to you? Is that totally like the prelude to the Jordy Nelson signing that's coming up? So yeah,
Donald Driver.
Exactly. Yeah, like one of the things I worry about with the Jets and the passing game and Aaron Rodgers is just that they had this phenomenal defense last year, and it's going to be really good again. And, when the last time we saw Nathaniel Hackett and Aaron Rodgers together, the Packers, I think, averaged they were either the longest or the second longest amount of time between plays. They ran at this glacial pace. So if you've got a slow-paced offense and a lot of favorable run-friendly game scripts, I just wonder how much passing Rodgers and the Jets are actually going to do. He could be really efficient, but I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to be anywhere close to the league lead in pass attempts this season. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if there's much room for any fantasy relevant pass catchers here other than Garrett Wilson. I think it's going to be Garrett Wilson and then a lot of guys with 500 or 600 yards.
What about, so let's I want to touch on Wilson and Rodgers before I move on. Number one, Wilson, wide receiver 9 in the Fantasy Pros Championship right now. And that has an ADP, and I just had it here. ADP right now, Garrett Wilson at the 202. So he's actually going right behind A.J. Brown and Devontae Adams, but he's going ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jalen Waddle, and Devontae Smith. Does that feel right to you, Pat, that he's the 9th receiver off the board and quite frankly, is going to be a
feels maybe
a lot of players? Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got so I don't think it's too far out of line. I think near that the turn maybe seems a little aggressive. I don't think I want to take him quite that early. So I'm probably going in a different direction there, but I don't know. It's maybe nitpicking a little. I'd like him more 3 or 4 spots back from there. But yeah, it's just the overall, my concerns about the lack of pass volume with the Jets this year might make me a little cooler than that on Garrett Wilson, even though he's a terrific player. I think Rodgers is going to love throwing to him. And, if he stays healthy, he's unquestionably going to lead the team in catches and receiving yards by a mile.
Pat, we've talked about how you're down on the volume for this Jets offense, which I get for passing. But what if I told you that Aaron Rodgers is currently going as quarterback 16 at the 1408 of Fantasy Pros drafts? You can get him. Let's see. How do I want to frame this? He's going after guys like Daniel Jones, Tua Tagovailoa, Geno Smith, Anthony Richardson, Kirk Cousins. Rodgers is off the board at quarterback 16. To me, if I wait on quarterback, if I get Aaron Rodgers as my second quarterback in the 14th round, I feel pretty good about that, even with the lack of passing volume. Does the fact that he's going so low in Fantasy Pros drafts, and by the way, we've had several go off since he was traded to the Jets. So I think we have a big enough sample size that fantasy owners are simply just letting him slide, and you can get him at a really good discount. Is there anything to like about Rodgers knowing that you can get him that late in Fantasy Pros championship drafts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing is, I don't know how many splash games you're going to get out of him, Eric. Like I've got him quarterback 17, and like I'm the only reason I don't have Anthony Richardson ahead of him right now is just because I'm not totally convinced that they're going to start Richardson in September. Who would you personally prefer between those two guys, Rodgers and Richardson?
This is a perfect example of how you're, what league you're drafting in. So for Fantasy Pros championship drafts, where you're trying to beat out, 10,000, 13,000, 14,000 plus other teams, I'm going to go with a guy that has a much higher ceiling, especially the untapped upside, right? Like, we don't know what Anthony Richards is going to be capable of this year. He could be awful. He could be awesome. But the fact is, he's quarterback 14 in the 13th round. Give me him in all the Fantasy Pros championships. Now, if I'm drafting in a closed 12-team league, there's plenty of those at myffpc.com as well, where you're just trying to beat the other 11 owners. I think there's something to be said for drafting Aaron Rodgers at that point. For anybody who is drafting in, and we don't have these with the FFPC, but if you're drafting in a 10-team league, I mean, obviously, then you're going for the ceiling guys for sure because of this. So I think that's how I would look at it right now. And I do think Anthony Richardson, his ADP will go up a little bit higher than where it's at right now, because that's just the way high stakes players' minds work. It's the sexy new thing, the brand new toy, the shiny new present, under the tree, what have you. So I think that he will go up a little bit more, but that's how I'd handle it for Fantasy Pros Championship. I'd rather have Richardson over Rodgers at that point.
I agree with that strategy too. I mean, maybe Rodgers makes more sense in, like you said, a closed 12-team league, and especially one where the benches are maybe shorter and it's not prudent to carry two quarterbacks. Then maybe you want the safety play with Rodgers. But I'm worried that there aren't going to be a lot of big games there. I feel like they're going to be a lot of sort of game manager, 200-yard, 2-touchdown games from Aaron Rodgers.
And it's one of those things too. It's like, the way that the media and everything is being shoved down our throats right now about how awesome this is for the Jets and how fantastic a get this is with Rodgers. Like, it's hard not to be excited about him as a New York Jet, at this point. But as we get deeper into training camp, and especially, we open up the season in September, if he's having these 200-yard, 2-touchdown games, it's kind of like, okay, well, I guess I got what I paid for in the 16th round. Not all that exciting. He might get the job done for somebody who's playing matchups and streaming quarterbacks for sure. Moving on, Donovan Smith, no longer with the Buccaneers. He is with the Kansas City Chiefs. He's going to play left tackle there, which I believe moves Jawan Taylor over to right tackle because they moved on from Orlando Brown. I think I got that all right. I guess the thing here is, Pat, is there any concern with the Chiefs offense that the starting two tackles on this offensive line will be brand new for Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs this year? Or does that not register that much for you?
I think now it doesn't register anymore, but I mean, that was sort of this nagging concern in the offseason, Eric, wasn't it? Like that, everyone, I think, we never saw any sort of movement as far as like where people were taking Mahomes in like off-season best ball drafts, but like this tackle thing was like this looming headache with both of the starting tackles from last year, Orlando Brown and I think Andrew Wiley was the other guy, like neither of them being around. But yeah, they've really addressed that with Jawan Taylor, and now with the Donovan Smith signing. A lot of people had mocked the Chiefs with an offensive tackle at the end of the first round. They didn't do that. They took an edge rusher. And then they took a wide receiver in round 2. They did take a tackle in round 3, but maybe that was sort of the sign that there was something else cooking with them on the offensive line. But now I think, they also, I think it's Lucas Niang is like their swing tackle. And they've got this rookie, oh man, I'm forgetting his name. This guy from Oklahoma, who they took in the 3rd round. So, they're deep. They've got a little injury insurance. I think people are probably feeling pretty good about this not being a problem for Mahomes and the Chiefs now. Was it Wanya Morris, right? Yes.
Which I was watching the draft and I'm like, Wanya Morris, isn't that the dude from Boys to Men? And I come to find out that his mother was this huge Boys to Men fan, so she named him Wanya Morris. That's fantastic.
Oh man, that's funny.
Jerry Jeudy, his 5th-year option got picked up. Now, what's interesting about the Broncos here is they have a new head coach this year. They have Russell Wilson on this team that I can't believe he'd play this bad as he did in 2022, again in 2023, especially with Sean Payton. They drafted Marvin Mims in the 2nd round of the draft, and they still like Jeudy, obviously enough to pick up his 5th-year option, a guy who was on pace for, I want to say, like 1,100, 1,200 yards, something last year if he wouldn't have gotten hurt. What do you make of the Broncos receivers here? Because I think Judy's, and I'll look the ADP in a second. I think Judy's the guy going first. Do you have any redraft interest in Mims or Sutton this year, Pat?
Boy, and they've got Tim Patrick coming back from
Coming back from the ACL. That's right.
They signed Marquez Callaway, a former Saint, to be with Sean Payton. Yeah, it's weird, Eric, this crowded receiver room they have. And like the Denver Broncos didn't have a lot of draft capital, and they traded up to take Marvin Mims. So, I mean, that does seem like it seems like they're not done making moves with the wide receivers. Like we had heard kind of smoke all off season about Courtland Sutton possibly being traded away, and then even like a few Jerry Jeudy rumors. So I don't think Jeudy would be the guy to get moved, and I do think he's going to be the lead receiver. I'll be anxious to see where his ADP kind of settles. I mean, it seems like people have been pretty aggressive with him lately, and maybe a little too aggressive. So as of now, they're all kind of fades for me, Eric, just because like, how do you feel about Russell Wilson? I'm worried that, and we have some experience with him as a former Wisconsin Badger, and then ripping out our souls in the playoffs with the Seattle Seahawks a few years ago. I don't know if I saw the same Russell Wilson last year. Like he used to have that spin move when an edge rusher would be bearing down on him, and he'd have that tight little spin move to get outside, and then all of a sudden, like he's got no one near him, and he's buying time for his receivers to get open, and he's making these big plays downfield. Like we didn't see that same sort of elusiveness from him last year. At least I didn't, and I'm kind of concerned. Like also, man, some of the shots he would take to DK Metcalf, where like Metcalf was running a sideline route and he just like sail it way over his head. Yeah, so I'm kind of concerned that maybe the Russell Wilson we used to know isn't coming back, and just all this target competition now in Denver. So I'm just kind of off the Denver pass catchers right now.
I will tell you this regarding Wilson. There were a lot of high stakes players that I talked, and not even high stakes players. I mean, there's a lot of people that were talking about when he was even his last couple years in Seattle. You could kind of see like, oh man, this guy might be regressing here, and it might be permanent. He might not be able to get it back. So I know there's a lot of people that were down on Russell Wilson even prior to last season. The great thing about having a bad season and the fact that you are a proven player like Russell Wilson means that I will probably be interested in you the following year because your ADP is going to be depressed. Quarterback 17, 14-12, right after Aaron Rodgers, right before Kyler Murray and Jared Goff. So I could get on board with him as my second quarterback there. And then the receivers don't matter. Now, Jerry Jeudy is wide receiver 24 right now, and he is going at the end of the 5th round. Courtland Sutton's wide receiver 46. Marvin Mims is wide receiver 73 in the Fantasy Pros Championship. So basically, Mims is free. Sutton is depressed. I mean, I guess I could get on board with him. I don't think I'm going to have a ton of shares with him in the leagues I'm participating in this year, but certainly a guy who's had the pedigree that he's had and the performance that he's had at that point. Yeah, I'll probably take a couple of shots on him just to see what happens. Remember, a lot of people were saying last year too, people who were watching the Broncos, they're saying like, it seems like Wilson and Sutton have this chemistry going right here. It wasn't Jeudy. And then of course, Jeudy ended up having, the better season of them. So I agree with you. It's tough to get on board with any one of these receivers in a managed league like the Fantasy Pros Championship. Russell Wilson is quarterback 17. I'm okay with. And then they got to figure out that run game, which we didn't talk about as well. Javonte Williams, I am convinced that this guy is going to be a tease all season where we think he's just about to come back. And then they put it off another week or two. And then when he does come back, you can't really start him because he's in a timeshare. So I'm thinking like Samaje Perine. I'll ask you what you think about Perine right now. But this is a guy that they got early in free agency. They didn't really do anything significant in the draft or free agency besides Perine. I think Perine's an interesting guy in Denver this year.
Really interesting. And yeah, when I was cooking up my first set of 2023 rankings back, like when the NFL playoffs were still going on, Eric, like I was, just assuming that Javonte Williams was going to be back and, having him like flirting with running back one territory. And then, we've been seeing these stories like, oh yes, Javonte Williams is expected back at some point this season. And you're like, what do you mean at some point this season? Like, are we talking Halloween, Thanksgiving? Like when exactly can we expect him back? So it sounds like maybe he is a realistic candidate for the PUP list. And yeah, man, I mean, P. Ryan is not sexy, but he's just workmanlike. He's able to carry a heavy load if he needs to. And maybe he's going to need to. So I think he probably is a value now, with a lot of people expecting that Williams will be back early in the season, and maybe that's not the case. And by the way, just getting back to those pass catchers, I did not realize how low Sutton's ADP was.
It's tanking.
There's a backlash, I think, to how highly regarded he was a year ago at this time, and then really letting people down. I mean, it seems like, people are almost avoiding him out of spite this year.
Mm-hmm. And I get that. And that's one of the things, and I don't know if you fought this as a fantasy football player, Pat, but like, you always hear every year from people like, oh, I'll never draft that guy again. Oh, he really screwed me over in the third round last year. I'll never draft that guy. Like, I used to be like that, but that was like 10, 15 years ago. And I realized I'm really hamstringing myself because Matthew Berry, except from NBC, always says this all the time. He's like, I don't hate players, I hate ADP. And I think that's, truer words have never been spoken, because I can totally love a player one year because I'm getting him at a great value, and then totally hate him the next year because he had this great season and now he's priced out of my range. Totally true of Sutton too. I mean, I wasn't all about him last year because of how far he was shooting up in drafts, but this year, like the wide receiver 46, yeah, I mean, he's going to be on several of my teams this year.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we do have to try to divorce ourselves from the emotion of this game as much as possible. And exactly, don't hate players, hate ADP. And Sutton is a pretty good example of that.
Let's move on and talk about another team that has some interesting receivers. Seems like they do every single year. The Pittsburgh Steelers did not, I don't think they drafted a receiver at all in the 2023 NFL draft. They don't have Claypool anymore, but they still have Deontay Johnson. Obviously, George Pickens is there. They traded for Allen Robinson. Out of those three guys, I think the guy who's most exciting, the high-stakes players, is George Pickens. Is it wheels up for him this year, or is there reason to maybe practice a little bit of care and caution when we're drafting him?
Oh, man. I'm going to want to get your take on this, Eric, but I am actually out on Pickens, and I was like really high on him last year. I was like team George Pickens for sure. And this guy is really, really good, maybe even special on contested catches. Like, he is fantastic on balls in the air, and he just plays a fun game. He kind of plays bully ball. Like, you see him like blocking cornerbacks and just burying these guys, even though he's kind of a skinny dude himself, and like a lot of highlight reel catches. But what has me concerned is his ability to be a target earner. I mean, we did not see him. He had a 15.3% target share for the Steelers last year, which is pretty lackluster. Didn't have more than 8 targets in any game. Didn't have more than 6 targets in any game from week 6 on. And then when you like kind of dig into the next gen stats a little, he was near the bottom of all wide receivers in like separation and cushion. He averaged like 2 yards after catch per reception, which was near the bottom of the league. So there's some red flags here that I'm a little concerned about. And like maybe all these contested catches are just kind of symptoms of a guy who's not getting separation easily enough. So I'm a little concerned. And just because like he's got this sexy game, I think people are going to fall in love with him and maybe ignore some of the warning signs.
People definitely fell in love with him last year. I'll tell you that. It always seemed like he went like a round or two as like a fourth receiver, like before I was ready to take him. And let's get in this here for a second. So I'm trying to think, when did he tear? He tore his ACL in 2021. So you had him basically playing the end of the 2021 season. The 2022 season, this is like the the throwaway year where it's like, oh, it takes you a full year to kind of get back. So this is like now we should be seeing like peak George, well, not peak George Pickens, but George Pickens at full health in 2023. I totally agree with you on the targets, because that you're only seeing 6 targets. How many the final game? How many games of the season?
How many?
It was six or fewer targets from what point on?
Week 6 on.
Week 6 on. Okay, you are getting into like best ball Devery Henderson territory,
right?
With those kind of targets, right? And he's not being drafted like that. He's being drafted in the Fantasy Pros Championship right now, wide receiver 38 at the end of the 7th round. He's actually he's at the end of a long run. Marquise Brown, Tyler Lockett, Ayuk, Kadarius Toney, Burks, and then Mike Evans, and then it's Pickens, right? So that's where he's going right now as wide receiver 38. And I think I'm borderline okay with that, grabbing him in like 1 or 2 leagues. But man, he gets much higher. I don't know if I can get on board with that, because then you're drafting this guy as like sort of an every week starter. And he showed us, again, it was last year and he was coming off the ACL, but he showed us that is not part of his repertoire yet.
That's interesting that he's only wide receiver 38. And
you thought he'd be higher?
Yeah, and I mean, that just shows how sharp the FFPC crowd is. Because I think if you, like if home leagues were drafting right now, like he'd be in the low 30s. And I've got him at wide receiver 41, so I'm not that far off with that. Mm-hmm. But your theory about the ACL recovery, and maybe we should give him a little bit of a mulligan for the rookie year and not earning targets. Maybe not earning the targets we thought he should have earned. So, that's a reason to be optimistic that maybe he does a little more in year 2.
And we'll see. I mean, obviously he is going to be one of the keys to fantasy football this year. For whatever reason, that he is going that late. I know you give, I shouldn't even be saying this on here, but sometimes some of the high stakes players will call, when we get to late July and August, they call it tourist season. So you have the people that are only drafting 1, maybe 2 leagues, and then that's it. And then they wait for that to roll around. And then that's when you start to see these weird ADP swings. But Pickens to me would be the type of guy that I think people would be very excited about drafting. And I would assume his ADP would go up then. I think it's going to remain right around where it is right now until late July. But we'll be following it right here on these airwaves, and of course at FantasyPros.com. DeAndre Swift, a draft day trade. He goes to the Philadelphia Eagles after the Lions took Jahmyr Gibbs. We're going to get into Jahmyr Gibbs coming up in the next segment. But I want to talk about Swift in Philadelphia. So he goes there. The Eagles already signed Rashad Penny. They still have Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell, and somebody named Trey Sermon is still there as well, bumming around. And Kennedy Brooks, who I remember a lot of people like, oh, take Kennedy Brooks at the end of your rookie drafts last year. He's still on the roster with Philly. This to me strikes me, or this team has always struck me as like, hey, let's have all these guys contribute, which is maddening for fantasy football. It's maddening for Fantasy Pros Championship leagues where you have to manage your rosters all season. You got to set your lineups. Best ball, it's a little bit less important. But your thoughts on Swift in Philly? What does he do there? I'll get you the ADP for him in a second. What does he do in Philly, and what's his impact on the other rushers in that backfield?
I do think this smacks of a committee, Eric. Don't you? I mean, like with all these bodies, Swift, and maybe we should maybe take the Lions' word for it that Swift isn't reliable. Like clearly he fell out of favor there. Maybe going to a team with a slightly, and that's the thing, like the Detroit offense, it was a pretty good ecosystem for DeAndre Swift, but like he would go these games. It seemed like the only time he was truly impactful was when the Lions were getting beaten by double digits and they went into like catch up mode. And all of a sudden they would be dumping it off to Swift and he'd have these bigger pass catching games. So I don't know if the usage maybe stabilizes a little bit with the Eagles. We'd like to see that, but I'm definitely being a little wary here. Like I think I've got him kind of ranked in high end RB3 territory right now. And like, I'm not that much higher on him than I am on Rashad Penny. Like I do think Swift is probably, if everyone stays healthy, going to be the most valuable running back in that backfield. but I don't know if he leads that team in carries if everyone stays healthy. I think that's probably Rashad Penny. And like, I don't think Gainwell's going to be totally shut out of the mix either. So it's kind of a complicated backfield, and I'm cautious about getting too aggressive on any single one of these guys.
Nelson Verbit, who runs Dynasty Depot, was a guest on my show. God, this is probably a couple of months ago. It was right before the Super Bowl, because he's a big Eagles fan. And he was telling me all about, like, I am loading up on as many Kenneth Gainwell shares as I can because I think he's going to be the guy next year. And now, lo and behold, what happens? They've added Swift, and they add Rashad Penny. Swift is actually going as running back 22, ADP of the 606 in Fantasy Pros drafts. Now, some of those drafts have taken place since he's been traded, and he's gone as late as the 709. He is followed in that Eagles backfield by Rashad Penny at running back 34 in the early 9th round. I like that for the zero RB drafters. I can get him. I know I'm going to have Penny on several of my teams this year because I'm going to be able to utilize him if Swift is dinged up and he can't go. Because I'd rather have Penny than Gainwell. And Gainwell, obviously, he's already made his presence known in the red zone. He catches balls out of the backfield. Yeah, I think that's going to be his role again this year. But like, to me, from where you have Swift right now, like, that running back 22, way too high for your liking.
Yeah, definitely. I just like, even though it's PPR, like, Gainwell is kind of a PPR back too. Like, he's a lighter, smaller pass catching back. So I don't even know if Swift has like the obvious passing downs to himself on that team. And like, with all these guys, or at least Swift and Penny not being the most durable, I mean, maybe that's just kind of the way they're going to deploy these guys, where like no one is getting snap shares of, much higher than 40%, where like, right, it's not a majority share for any one guy. It's maybe more like a plurality, where all these guys are under 50% with snap shares. So it's going to be messy. And it's too bad, because we love this offense. We love the touchdown potential, although we know Jalen Hurts is probably going to call his own number quite a bit there. But, we like that this is probably the best offensive line in football too. So I understand the appeal, but man, at least one of these guys is going to wind up being a bear trap for fantasy.
I'm just looking at the ADP for the Chiefs too, like the two Super Bowl teams last year. And the Chiefs, though, their first running back coming off the board is Isaiah Pacheco at the 506, followed by the newly signed Jerick McKinnon, and then Clyde Edwards-Helaire going in the 15th and 16th rounds, respectively. The two prolific offenses last year that were, met for a championship, and none of those running backs are going high. I don't know if there's any. It's extremely small sample size. I don't know if there's anything to make out of it, but that is something that's very interesting to me as we look at the Chiefs and the Eagles. One last thing I want to get to in this segment. I know we're short on time. Gabe Davis and Khalil Shakir, Buffalo wide receivers. Who was the bigger winner in the NFL draft? Because the Bills did not take a receiver, I think, until the 5th round. Who was the bigger winner for you for fantasy? Is it Gabe Davis or Khalil Shakir?
Oh, man, I want to say it's Khalil Shakir, because I feel like he's got the inside track to be the starting slot guy. But I don't know if that's right, because I know PFF is projecting Deontay Hardy to be the starting slot receiver. I love Shakir. Like, I loved him at Boise State. I thought he was just a feisty dude, an overachiever. I really think he's going to win that job. And like, I've got some concerns about Gabe Davis, and it's kind of a lot like my concerns about George Pickens, just the ability to draw targets consistently. We know he can make big plays, but the games where he's getting 3 or 4 targets, it's not going to do you much good if he maybe catches one of them for a big gain. But man, I want to like Shakir so much. This Deontay Hardy thing has me a little depressed. I wish they hadn't brought him in, because I think Shakir could be a potential sleeper if he can earn that job.
Let me ask you this final question on this Bills wide receiver situation. Better draft value. I think I know what you're gonna say on this, but I'm gonna ask you anyway. Gabe Davis is wide receiver 42 right now. He's going off the board at the 809. Khalil Shakir, wide receiver 70 at the 1506. Pat Fitzmaurice, if you're drafting, you're going to take a lot more Shakir than Gabe Davis, right?
I'm going to take a lot of Shakir at that price point, Eric. He's going to be one of my favorite late round dart throws.
one of my favorite co-hosts here, Pat Fitzmaurice from Fantasy Pros, joining me on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Hey, don't forget, best ball season is here. We're helping you win. We're helping you draft winning teams on Fantasy Alarm and Better Sports Network. Check out the first best ball fantasy football draft featuring some of our top analysts like Howard Bender, Andrew Cooper, Britt Flynn, Corey Parson, and more, now playing on YouTube at Fantasy Alarm and Better Sports Network. Learn winning draft strategies and figure out which players you need to have on your fantasy football teams this season. Get in the huddle. Start drafting best ball teams of your own at myffpc.com. Don't forget, myffpc.com has 2 best ball tournaments going on right now. A $125 entry will get you in the running for a $200,000 grand prize in the best ball tournament. And if you want to enter in for $35, you can still win $50,000 in the Superflex best ball tournament. Both those tournaments going on at myffpc.com. All right, you've put up with us long enough talking about veterans. Let's get to rookies. Let's get to the NFL draft. Coming up after the break, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Zay Flowers, Dalton Kincaid. We're going to be talking about all those guys and more. Pat Fitzmaurice from Fantasy Pros, Eric Balkman from the FFPC. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
Better Sports Network. Collectible moments.
Everybody up here at U.S. Cellular. Sox 5 runs, 6 hits. The 2-1 to Bartlett. Swing, chop to short. Ramirez has it, throws. Bartlett picks the perfect game. His second no-hitter. People going crazy here at U.S. Cellular. He's mobbed by his teammates. A perfecto.
Now there's a steal by Bird. Underneath the DJ, lays it in. Right up, 1 second left. What a play by Bird. Bird stole the impounding pass. Laid it up to DJ. DJ laid it up and in. And Boston has a 1-point lead with 1 second left.
Out of the I formation on first down. Peterson to carry, looking for running room on the right side, has it to the 25, across the 30, across the 35, and out of bounds at the 40-yard line. Adrian Peterson has just gone over 2,000 yards for the season, the 7th man in NFL history to cross the 2,000-yard mark.
Well, a thundering ovation for number 66, Mario Lemieux.
Just the emotion I'm sure Mario is feeling in this place. You don't appreciate something until it's gone, and it's so great to have Mario back.
Yager turns around. Over to Lemieux. Mario Lemieux, his first goal in his comeback here tonight at the Mellon Arena. And the Penguins lead 3-0, and he is smiling like a butcher's dog. Mario Lemieux.
Oh, the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone. The Bears have scored, but the bands are out on the field.
Pearson moves in front of the STP Dodge. Petty comes back to the inside. They almost touch as they move down low in the banking. You're going to be side by side as they exit the bank and head for the finish line.
Richard Petty goes back in front. They both spin. They're in the wall. Petty is sliding, slamming into the wall. He's coming down toward the finish line. Will he make it? Pearson is still running. The winner is car number 21. An amazing finish. Richard Petty's car demolished in the front end, as well as car number 21. An unbelievable finish, a terrible crash. David Pearson has won the Daytona 500. Leitner catches, comes down, dribbles, shoots, scores! Christian Leitner has hit the bucket at the buzzer! Pitched by Downing, swinging, there's a drive into left center field. That ball is going to be out of here. It's gone. It's 7-15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron. The most valuable player is Magic Johnson. 42 points, 15 rebounds, and 7 assists. He starts at center, plays forward and guard, and leads the Los Angeles Lakers to a world championship 123-107 over Philadelphia.
Whether you collect sports memorabilia, fantasy championships, or winning bet slips, talk about it on Better Sports Network. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Minutes until the top of the hour here on the Better Sports Network. You are watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. I am Eric Balkman from the HSFF Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and of course the FFPC. My guest co-host this week, Pat Fitzmaurice from FantasyPros.com at Fitz_FF on Twitter. Hey, get all pro access to Fantasy Alarm and unlock all its features, including all fantasy football and betting content, plus the award-winning DFS playbook covering 10 different sports. For a limited time, get all this for 50% off your first 6 months with promo code ALARM50. That's ALARM50 at FantasyAlarm.com. So get started with a free trial today. That's promo code ALARM50, ALARM50 at FantasyAlarm.com. You know, one of the things I'm not necessarily a huge bettor. As like I don't get into the weeds there too much, Pat. But I think you do, right? Did you place any bets on the NFL draft this past weekend?
I did. I had like quite a few sort of low stakes bets, but yeah, I probably had like maybe like 50 or 60 bets down.
Was there one that you were more proud of than others that hit?
I wound up basically breaking even or maybe making just a little bit of money. And it would have been a losing draft betting season, Eric, if not for really hammering Anthony Richardson under pick 7.5 on the morning of the draft. I just felt like there was no way that people were going to pass on that package of just raw athleticism and potential. So I was pretty convinced of that and, kind of upped my stake on him. And then there were these weird bets, like where you could bet player versus player, who was going to get drafted earlier. And like the odds were just sort of weird. And like the odds weren't really right to make it worth investing on anyone, except they were down to just on the day of the draft, just one single player versus player prop. And it was Darnell Wright versus Jackson Smith and Jigba. And Darnell Wright was at like plus 170.
Oh,
and
nice.
And I like that one. I thought there was finally value in one of those head-to-head things. So I hit that one. That kind of saved me. But otherwise, just throwing around a lot of money. I mean, at one point I had Darnell Washington to be the first tight end taken. I think I put that down right after the combine. That sort of blew up in my face. A lot of bets blew up in my face. But, the Richardson thing kind of saved me at the end.
Anthony Richardson saving fantasy and betting seasons. Probably not the last time we'll hear that. Pat, we got Jan Rogaway in the YouTube chat right now asking or saying, I'm being offered Pittman for Ayuk. Do I accept? Let's frame this in terms of dynasty. Pittman and Ayuk. So I always look at these types of situations. And I was talking with God, who was I talking with about that? I can't remember. It's not important. I tend to look at these trades like who has the best opportunity to have an elite type season, right? And I think when it's close between two players, I tend to lean towards the player that could have the elite top 5, top 10 season. I don't necessarily see Brandon Ayuk getting that done in San Francisco when you have George Kittle there. You have Deebo Samuel there, and obviously Christian McCaffrey. It's going to be difficult for him to have that type of massive season. Michael Pittman, however, in Indianapolis, say what you will about him, but dude catches a lot of passes, and he's going to be able to grow up with this Anthony Richardson guy at quarterback. And if he could figure out his short-term accuracy, then top, wide receiver 5, wide receiver 10 season is in the cards for Pittman more so than Ayuk. I would rather have Pittman than Ayuk in this deal. What say you?
I agree with you, Eric. I mean, I think I've got Pittman wide receiver 19 for Dynasty and Ayuk wide receiver 24. And It's basically that we have seen Michael Pittman be an alpha receiver, a target hog. And we haven't seen that with Brandon Ayuk yet. And Brandon Ayuk is really talented. I like him a lot, but that is a, pass catching committee there. That is a true group. And that's a team that wants to run the ball too. That's just sort of in the 49ers DNA. And like, I think the only reason people are maybe a little down on Pittman for this year is just the Colts had such a miserable season with their quarterbacks last year. I mean, it was just not a good environment, not a healthy ecosystem for him.
We don't have rookie draft data yet at the FFPC. Because the drafts are basically going on this coming weekend. And so it's difficult to say how much you have to pay for Jahmyr Gibbs, a guy who the Lions got at the 12th overall pick in the draft. Suffice it to say, I think most people will be taking him at 102. Is he being overvalued in Dynasty? Question number one for you, Pat. And then for redraft right now, I could tell you that Jahmyr Gibbs is going off at, where did I have him here? Running back 15 at the 406. If you like Gibbs, that's great. But if you want him, man, you're going to have to pay up to get him in terms of draft capital in the Fantasy Pros Championship and in terms of draft picks and players in Dynasty Leagues. Is he worth that price?
I could be talked into him at that price. I definitely think he should be the second overall player in one QB dynasty, probably fifth, like behind Bijan Robinson and the three quarterbacks in Superflex. In redraft, like my initial reaction would be that running back 15 would be a little bit high, just because we know that David Montgomery is going to get a lot of early down work. And, I think maybe the ideal usage and probably the way the Lions want to deploy Jahmyr Gibbs is sort of the way we saw Alvin Kamara used early in his career with the Saints, where he would have these of fewer than 200 carries, but close to 100 targets. And he famously had 81 receptions in each of his first 3 seasons in the NFL. I don't know if Gibbs gets to 81, but, ideally he gets a lot of value out of the passing game. And the one thing I've been sort of thinking about lately, Eric, and you can tell me if this makes any sense, because it's kind of a weird idea, but like I was a little worried that Gibbs, even though I thought it was kind of an unconventional pick for the Lions with their first draft pick, they still had another first round pick behind him and they had 2 second-round picks. And I thought after taking Gibbs, they were really going to go all in on their defense, especially like getting another pass rusher and adding more to the secondary, because really pass defense was the Lions' Achilles heel last year. I mean, they were terrible at it. They didn't really do that. And that might actually be good for Gibbs. Like maybe the game scripts aren't as run friendly as I thought they might be for the Lions, since they really didn't do a lot to fix their pass defense. Like, I mean, I kind of didn't like the Lions draft. They spent 2 first-round picks on sort of non-premium positions. We can like Gibbs for fantasy and still call that a questionable draft pick. That's kind of where I'm at with that one. So I don't know. Does that seem like, and really like with under 200 carries in his rookie year, Alvin Kamara, I think, was still like the running back 3. So, I mean, there's a path where maybe David Montgomery gets more carries and Gibbs is still like a high-end running back 1.
What throws the monkey wrench into this and trying to figure out Detroit, maybe it's just a fool's errand, and I should try not to figure that out because I'm not going to figure him out. Why? And if I remember the timeline right, did they not sign David Montgomery before Jamal Williams went to New Orleans? I thought that's the order it happened, right?
I think you're right.
Right. And I've heard this like, oh, yeah, once Williams was gone, they had to do something at running back. No, I think they went out and signed Montgomery. And here's the thing I really don't understand. They gave David Montgomery $11 million guaranteed. $11 million guaranteed when they could have Williams for cheaper. And then they go out and they use some significant, serious draft capital in Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, for fantasy, kind of like the Lions, right? Because they didn't do a ton to improve their defense when they probably should have. And that means a lot of high-scoring games again. That means more action for Amon-Ra St. Brown, more action for Jameson Williams when he gets back. We'll get to Sam Laporta in a little bit. But obviously, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be catching passes. Now, I'm not super comfortable, and I don't want to take what you said out of context. I'm not super comfortable comparing Gibbs to Kamara, because I think while they do certain things very similarly, I think they are different running backs. And I don't think that Gibbs has the upside that Kamara did, even though Kamara, what was he, a 3rd-round pick? He was a 3rd-round pick, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he just didn't have a big college career at Tennessee.
Right.
But I'm totally with you, Eric. I mean, Alvin Kamara's got just unreal contact balance, like uniquely special in that regard. And I don't think we should put Gibbs on that level.
Now, Gibbs is placed on the 102 level by most people in rookie dynasty drafts. The guy who was there before the NFL draft is now in Seattle. Now it's Jackson Smith-Njigba. How far down are you, Pat, on Smith-Njigba? The fact that he not only was passed over by 19 teams, or at least 19 picks before Seattle took him at 20. But the fact that he landed in Seattle with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, how is this, if at all, affecting you in Dynasty Leagues with JSN?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really changed him that much. Well, in one QB Dynasty Leagues, he would have been my 102 after Bijan pre-draft. Now I've moved Gibbs ahead of him, but he's still 103 for me, even though I didn't love the landing spot and all the other receivers. I mean, I thought there was kind of a gap between JSN and everyone else at wide receiver. That gap is closed, but he would still be my top wide receiver in this rookie class. Yeah, I mean, he did fall a little further. I mean, did you want the Packers to take him, Eric?
All right.
Packers fan.
Here's the thing. It doesn't really matter what I wanted because I knew they weren't taking a receiver. Like, I made my piece of that. I'm like, God, Jackson Smith and Jigba in a Packers uniform. Wouldn't that be great? But I knew they weren't going to. I mean, this is like 20-some years. So I just kind of, I didn't even let it creep into my mind. Like, when they were on the clock, I'm like, oh, they could take JSN. We know they won't, but they could take him right now. And it was fun to think about. But for me, I never really seriously entertained the thought of them actually doing it.
Yeah, I mean, PFF just came out with an early 2024 mock draft, and they've got the Packers taking Emeka Ogbuka, an Ohio State receiver. And it's like, no, man, they don't do that. When are we going to learn? So, but yeah, I definitely hate the landing spot, though. They've got Metcalf and Lockett, and neither of those contracts, I know they have an out, but it would be a real expensive out on Lockett after this upcoming year. So like, he's going to this team where he's going to be the number 3 at least for a year. This is a team that was very high in percentage of 2 tight end sets and very low in percentage of 3 receiver sets. Now I know that was maybe personnel related. I mean, they didn't want to throw D. Eskridge out there on 70% of their offensive snaps, but I just don't know if there is going to be like enough for JSN to have any sort of rookie year impact. I don't know if he's going to see enough targets for that to happen.
For dynasty wise, still 103 though, you said, right?
Yeah, I mean, I still like the long-term outlook. I think the talent's going to shine through. A dude who had 1,600 yards while sharing a field with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave at Ohio State. I mean, that's impressive.
Isn't it crazy? And who's the receiver? Emeka Egbuka? That's his name?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So isn't it crazy that Ohio State had 2 first-round receivers in 2022? They had 1 this year, and they're probably going to have 2 next year with both Egbuka and Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, 5 receivers in the first round in 3 years. It's incredible.
Yeah.
So kudos to the Ohio State and what they're doing there. I want to get back to Seattle, though. I was on the air with Better Sports Network in our live draft coverage with Mark Malusis and Andrew Cooper, Austin Nace from Campus to Canton. When the pick happened that just floored us, Zach Charbonnet, the Seattle Seahawks hit gold with Kenneth Walker in the second round last year. They decide, man, we did so good drafting the running back in the second round last year. Let's do it again this year. I don't know what to make of this backfield. I don't know how much you're penalizing Zach Charbonnet in your rookie draft rankings right now, Pat. I also don't know if you have Kenneth Walker in any of your dynasty leagues and like what dynasty owners should be doing with them. But to quote Marty Huggins, played by Zach Galifianakis in the campaign, bring a broom because it's a mess. It is absolutely a mess in the Seattle backfield as far as fantasy football. Can you make heads or tails out of this?
I could hear like millions of fantasy managers groaning when Zach Charbonnet got picked by this year. I mean, that was like, we were really pinning our day 2 hopes on Charbonnet landing, in some dream landing spot, Miami, Cincinnati, which would have heralded the release of Joe Mixon, Philadelphia maybe. And just such a terrible situation, not only tanking Charbonnet's value, but also like shaking our faith in Kenneth Walker, who everyone was really excited about, I think, going into year 2. And now I don't know what, like, do you see this being like maybe a 60-40 Walker Charbonnet split, Eric? Does that sound like approximately right? Or
I at least to start, right? I mean, maybe to start, maybe it's more like 70-30 to start. But Walker, one of the knocks on him coming into the NFL was he's not a real big pass catcher. well, Charbonnet can catch passes. Maybe he gets more of the third down work. I don't know. Maybe they could go, what we've seen with our beloved Packers over the years, even dating back to the Super Bowl year, where they would have like this rotation where the lead guy, this like how it is with Aaron Jones right now. It seems like he does 2 series and then AJ Dillon does a series, right? Maybe that could be the situation where it's like literally a 2/3, 1/3 split there. I don't know. Kenneth Walker, here's what I do know. Kenneth Walker is being drafted as running back 8 at the 210 right now. Man, I don't like that at all. I don't necessarily love the guys going right behind him in Breece Hall and Tony Pollard, but he has plummeted a little bit. So I don't know if I'd be willing to take Kenneth Walker there. Now, Charbonnet, as far as his ADP goes, running back 28 at the 801. That's a little bit more palatable to me, even though he's the rookie. So for me, like, I don't know what the split's going to be, but I'm more on board, much more on board with Charbonnet in the 8th round rather than sinking a mid to late 2nd round pick on Kenneth Walker at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm on either, but I find the Charbonnet ADP maybe a little less egregious. Like, I had to drop Walker out of the top 10. And if what you are, theorizing about, Eric, is right, where now Charbonnet is maybe going to be the primary pass catching back, like that really kind of kneecaps Walker's value. If he's not being used in the passing game at all, he's not going to finish as a top 10 back. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. And I'm like, that's concerning. And I think he's just a stay away if he's still in the top 10. I just think that's too high. And I think a lot of people are going to be preaching that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a little bit of slippage, as spring turns to summer here in Kenneth Walker's ADP. But man, it's just gross. I get it from Seattle's point of view. Like, they love to run the ball. They've had guys like Chris Carson and Rashad Penny who've missed significant time to injury. And like, they were kind of in a spot last year where they were looking at like, a DJ, 2 years ago, maybe, where they were looking at a DJ Dallas, Travis Homer backfield. And like, they don't want to roll with that. They want a backup plan. So I get it from their perspective, but man, it hurts for fantasy.
It does indeed, for sure. Speaking of hurting for fantasy, Baltimore has been an interesting team the last couple of weeks. They still have Mark Andrews. They still have Rashad Bateman, who, by the way, called out the GM about a month or so ago, which is something to keep in mind here. Then they give all this guaranteed money to Odell Beckham. Then they get Lamar Jackson back in the fold, who officially signed his deal today with Baltimore. And they also drafted Zay Flowers. My concern here with Zay Flowers in dynasty leagues is, to me, it doesn't seem like guys like Andrews and Bateman are going anywhere. And you can make the case that they believe in Odell Beckham given all this money. Are you nervous about drafting Zay Flowers in your rookie draft, which is coming up in about an hour? Are you nervous about drafting Zay Flowers in your rookie draft, given that this first year could be pretty bumpy for him as far as value goes?
The only reason why I'm not that nervous is I have serious questions about the ability of Odell Beckham to play 17 games. Maybe we have to worry a little bit about Rashad Bateman's durability after last year. And as you mentioned, his shot at Eric DaCosta. So, maybe he's on the outs a little bit. But, I mean, the other thing, they're probably not going to be quite as run heavy now that they've made this sea change at offensive coordinator and have Todd Monk in there. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're not quite as close to the vest and not one of the 3 or 4 run heaviest teams in the league anymore. Although I would expect any team with Lamar Jackson to probably be in the top half of the run heaviest teams in the league. But maybe they open it up a little. And I do like Flowers a lot. I mean, this guy is just a major overachiever and, a tough dude for his size. I think he's got like inside outside versatility. So I'm still pretty bullish on him. Maybe I'm not going after him in redraft while things sort of get sorted out here and we get a better idea what the target picture is. Like, I don't think he's a guy who's going to see 120 targets in year one. So, maybe he's not a big splashy guy right away, but I'm still feeling pretty good about him for dynasty long-term.
Fantasy Pros Championship ADP data states that Dalton Kincaid is going off the board as the tight end 13, almost a tight end 1 right now. Tight end 13 at the 10:01. That's fine. I don't necessarily want to talk about him in a redraft Fantasy Pros Championship aspect with you, Pat. How high would you take, though, Kincaid in an FFPC rookie draft, which many people will be starting on this coming Saturday? How high would you take him in knowing that it's tight end premium scoring and Kincaid is pretty good at catching passes for a tight end?
Yeah. So the tight end premium thing is the interesting, like in a non-tight end premium, I would say 107 in a 1 QB and 110 in super flex. And, we don't do, we have not done with our rookie rankings. Like we have super flex rankings, 1 QB rankings. We don't have tight end premium rankings. I think I'm probably vaulting him past Quentin Johnston for sure. Like I would have him behind all the first 4 first-round wide receivers. I think past Quentin Johnston for sure, and maybe past Flowers too. So in tight end premium, I'd maybe bump him up to like 105 or 106 in 1 QB and 108 or 109 in super flex.
It seems like, and I've asked this question for a lot of people, and it seems like I said, what's too high for Kincaid? And pretty much almost everybody I've talked to said 105 is like the earliest they'd consider him. Like for the first 4 picks, they can't look at him even in tight end premium, but it seems like 105 is probably where he's going to go.
Yeah, that seems about right. I mean, they still do have Dawson Knox, who's probably a better inline blocker. So maybe the snap counts for Kincaid are not quite what people are envisioning, although I do think he's probably going to earn targets at a good rate on the snaps he does play. So do you tend to think that might be a little too high? Are people getting out a little too far over their skis with him?
Well, in a normal rookie year, I would say, yeah, you could probably find some better value. I'm not real big, like you said at the top of the show, like we're not really huge on this year's rookie class. And so when you consider the guys around him, I think 105 would make some sense. I don't think that's necessarily an overdraft for him in a tight end premium league. And the fact that, I mean, like, there's been so many high stakes players I've talked to, Pat, like who does Dalton Kincaid remind you of? The guy I keep hearing, and they always couch it saying, I'm not saying he is this guy, but it reminds me a lot of Travis Kelce. And I keep hearing that over and over from people who have been very successful playing high stakes dynasty fantasy football. And it's like, at some point I got to start taking it seriously, And so if I can get a guy who reminds a lot of players of Travis Kelce at the 105, yeah, man, I'm on board. I don't think that's an overdraft this year.
Yeah, I mean, I like him a lot. I don't like him as much as I like Kyle Pitts, who I do think will eventually be a superstar again once, maybe the Falcons have a decent quarterback and a different play caller. I don't like him as much as I'm going to like Brock Bowers when he comes out of Georgia next year. But he is really good, and it's a good tight end class, I suppose. In a year where maybe like there's not a lot of top end talent at wide receiver and running back, we should count our blessings that we do have a pretty good tight end class.
Speaking of that tight end class, last question I want to get to in this segment: Sam Laporta or Michael Mayer for dynasty purposes? Which one would you rather have, Pat?
We are a big Sam Laporta shop at Fantasy Pros. Our college football and NFL draft analyst Thor Nystrom has been beating the Sam Laporta drum loudly for a long time. Derek Brown, my colleague, is a big Sam Laporta guy. I have Sam Laporta ranked 1 spot higher, not just at tight end, but overall ahead of Mayer. So I do think it's really close, but Laporta was great. And you probably know, living in the Midwest, Eric, that Iowa football, not a scintillating offense last year. And Laporta had something like a 30% target share and just a sick percentage of the overall offense in that, really just toothless offense that the Hawkeyes were rolling out last year. So I'm pretty big on Laporta, and, I'm kind of excited about the landing spot with Detroit.
Do you worry about, would you be interested in either of these guys in redraft? Like, because there is usually a learning curve with rookie tight ends. Are you concerned with Laporta or Mayer letting people down their rookie year?
A little bit, real late. I mean, I think they're in tight end 2 range, maybe like sort of mid-range to back end tight end 2. But I'm not investing too heavily in either of those guys.
Thursday night is fantasy football night on Better Sports Network. It rolls on. You actually just watched the Quick Outs Fantasy Football with Andrew Cooper and John Impemba. You're hanging out with me and Pat Fitzmaurice right now, all the way up until 9 o'clock when Dynasty Nerds and Garrett Price will take over. NFL free agency, trades, NFL draft, plus Dynasty League's best ball strategy. Hear the best fantasy football analysts, bettersports.com, the Better Sports Network app, and streaming everywhere on social media at Better Network. Let's take a quick break. A very quick break, because we've only talked about the round one guys. I want to get into the day 2 and day 3 guys, the Zach Evans of the world, the Chase Browns of the world, the Michael Wilsons of the world, Packers tight ends. We got to get into that as well. He's Pat Fitzmaurice from FantasyPros.com at Fitz_FF. And of course, Eric Balkman coming at you. That's me from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and the FFPC. Don't go anywhere. Hour 2 begins next.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
We got a question in here from Chill. It said, do we like Deuce Vaughn with his story in the open backfield in Dallas? Think he could have a big pass catching role?
Hey, buddy. How's it going? Hey, it's going good. This is Dad. My phone wasn't working. Look at here, man. You want to come to work with me next week? I wouldn't mind that at all.
So what do you guys think about Deuce Vaughn getting drafted by the Dallas Cowboys? His dad's there. What do you guys think about his potential upside for fantasy?
As far as his dad being there, I think you can take one of two approaches here, and it's the college homer rating their college players in the NFL kind of approach. Either he's a homer, he's too close to it, he can't look at it objectively, or he knows the ins and outs of this player better than anybody else in the entire world, right? So if there is anybody who knows what he can bring to a team, it is his father. There's also it's his father. Can he look past his bias towards his son? I tend to lean towards he works for this team. It's his job. Of course, there's faith in his son, but there's probably a role for him. That being said, I think it's Tony Pollard's backfield. He'll play a complementary role. I don't think we see even RB2 numbers out of him. And there's a real chance they bring Zeke back as well, right? I don't think they're done.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think Zeke still being out there, it's very likely that he returns to Dallas over any other team. I think if you were putting odds on it, you'd probably say right now it's Dallas. And if that happens, there's no place for Deuce Vaughn in this at all. And even if Zeke doesn't return, I have a lot of trouble feeling that there was more than, change of pace, low end change of pace role, like 3, 4, 5 touches a game kind of a thing.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. We would need to see him take a massive step up to be really considered for fantasy, but could definitely help that Dallas run offense, because I don't think it can really run all the way through Tony Pollard. I think they do need other options there.
Where does the time go? 8 minutes past the top of the hour here on the Better Sports Network. You are watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. I am Eric Balkman from the HSFF Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and the FFPC. He is Pat Fitzmaurice, the managing editor for Fantasy Pros and Betting Pros. Of course, a world famous ranker and a fan of Game of Thrones, right, Pat? I think
absolutely. So my longtime Twitter avatar, Braun the Brave.
Yeah.
Braun, like the guy's attitude. He's a drinker. We're Wisconsin guys, Eric. I mean, Braun would throw back a few beers with us. Tailgating before a Packers game. So big Game of Thrones guy, big Braun guy.
I don't know if I just got NFL draft on my mind. I was talking about this the other day. About like if Mel Kiper was a savant in like other forms of other walks of life, like what would he say in a Game of Thrones draft? Tyrion Lannister. Oh, he's got some red flags with the drinking. You don't know whose side he's completely on. There's a lot of potential. He's a real good thinker, but you don't know if he's going to be loyal when it comes down to it. Stuff like that. And like I've thought about like The Office. Game of Thrones, like pretty much everything. Seinfeld is another one too. Like it's so much fun. There's a lot of untapped potential there.
Questioning the mountain's lateral agility.
Yeah.
Like the Dewan Jones of Game of Thrones. Like, would he be able to move side to side well enough to?
Who was the prince that got gored by the mountain? Got his eyes.
Yes.
It's irritating me, but like had a great 3-cone time, but just couldn't. Like when it came to the bench press, like the strength just wasn't there, and the mountain overpowered him. Stuff like that. We could go on and on and on. We just don't have enough time. That's the problem. We've been talking a lot of Dynasty Fantasy Football here tonight. Have Pat and I. Hopefully you've been enjoying it. You can register for Dynasty Startups now at myffpc.com from the $100 level all the way up to the $5,000 level. We've been doing Dynasty for nearly a decade at the FFPC, well over 1,200 leagues. That's going to go up well past 1,300 this coming year. And yet not a single one has ever folded. So if you want to get in, play Dynasty Fantasy Football, play fantasy football year-round, you can do that at myffpc.com. We got a bunch of drafts popping off. Saturday morning is the next ones going off there. Best Ball Dynasty, Superflex Dynasty, the RotoViz Triflex Best Ball Dynasty, that's all going on there, myffpc.com. Okay, let's talk about some storylines that developed on day 2 and day 3 of the draft. I have seen so many memes out there in regards to Zach Evans, who is now with the Los Angeles Rams. And very often they are pitting him against some of the backups for the Rams. But now people are getting bold and saying, well, whoa. What about Evans versus Akers? And now I think that's where we're at here. How does Evans affect Cam Akers? And is he a serious threat to perhaps take touches away from Akers, touches that maybe Akers would have gotten had the Rams not drafted Evans?
So Zach Evans basically lost his job to a 3-star freshman last year, Quinshon Judkins at Ole Miss. And like framing it that way, that's sort of a damning way to put it for Zach Evans. In fairness, Quinshon Judkins is really good and is probably going to be a guy we're talking about for NFL purposes someday. But I have a hard time believing he's going to challenge Akers, even though Akers did have that sort of star-crossed season last year where he, we thought he was maybe a sleeper. Like I was really high on him. And then, I was kind of horrified watching that Thursday night season opener where all of a sudden he's just totally sitting out behind Darrell Henderson the whole game. And, at one point he was like kind of estranged from the team. It was just alarming. But then by the end of the season, he's sort of playing the workhorse role we thought he was going to play. And like, he was really impactful down the stretch in fantasy. I mean, I think there were probably a lot of championship teams that like picked him up on waivers late in the season and rode him to titles. So I do think now Akers is sort of entrenched there. I do think Zach Evans is better than Kyren Williams and that he's going to be the number 2. Are you with me on that, Eric? Do you think like maybe it's a little overblown, this threat that he poses to Cam Akers?
Yeah, I mean, like I look at, well, number one, I'm a Wisconsin guy, but I've been a Florida State guy since like the early 90s. So for me, like I can't speak ill about Cam Akers at all. And I'll tell you this too, because you reminded me of this Darrell Henderson thing. Better Sports Network was out at the FFPC live events at Planet Hollywood in September this past year, and Kyle Elfrink and I were covering it. I mean, we're 3-4 hours every day, Thursday, Friday, Saturday out there. And we would often get, when players were done drafting, they'd be walking by us and I'd be picking off these players that say, hey, this Akers Henderson thing, because we had the big viewing party Thursday night where people, all these drafters who are putting up 4 or 5 figure entry fees, watching this in real time. Like I thought I had Cam Akers nailed down, and now Darrell Henderson, like what am I doing here? And when we bring people on and ask them about this, it was just this: the shoulders would sink. It was a look of exhaustion. The palm would go on the forehead. It was like a headache commercial. What was the old headache commercial that like, I got a headache this big? That's what it was like, because people didn't know what to do. Akers showed us what he was capable of coming off that Achilles tear before last season started. I was really impressed with what he was able to do the same season. I can't imagine a guy like Evans, Williams, any of these guys are going to be taking any significant touches away from Akers. I think the thing that scares me with Akers is how good is this offense going to be? Cam Akers is running back 23 at the 609 right now. That's where he's going in Fantasy Pros Championship drafts. I think Evans is fine to take as a flyer in your rookie draft. I don't expect anything from him. I don't expect anything from any of the Rams running backs. And if I do have any of them on my team, then Pat, I'm pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the Achilles thing too. Like, we ascribe these magical healing powers to these guys. And you sort of brought this up with George Pickens earlier. Maybe kind of the same thing with Cam Akers when he made that miraculous and made it back for the playoffs 2 seasons ago. That we thought he was going to be okay, totally good to go. Maybe he still wasn't 100% early last season, but by the end of it, he looked pretty good. And, you know, as a Florida State guy, you know, I totally understand why you were pretty high on him coming into the NFL, and maybe like he finally started to show that down the stretch last year. Yeah. But I'm bullish overall. I think he's going to get, you know, not a lot of guys looking at true workhorse duty, and I think like Akers could be approaching that this year.
That's actually a really good point too, because even like the best guys are kind of in committees. A lot of the best guys are in committees. He is not. At least we don't think he is in Los Angeles. This next thing on the show sheet, I think, is going to be something that we're going to be talking about all throughout draft season. It's obviously going to affect rookie drafts this year, but I think the bigger impact is what's going to happen in Fantasy Pros Championship drafts. And that's this Roschon Johnson versus Chase Brown conversation. Roschon Johnson, as we all know, backed up Bijan Robinson at Texas. He gets taken by the Bears, who already have Khalil Herbert and Deontay Foreman they got in free agency this past year. But there's been a lot of steam for Roschon Johnson since he went to the Bears. A lot of people are very excited about that. On the same token, Chase Brown, a guy that I think a lot, I would talk to a lot of people and say, who's a sleeper on day 3 for you? And a lot of people said Chase Brown. They like Chase Brown. And Joe Mixon, we think he's going to be on the roster to start the season, but that's sort of up in the air. We don't know officially. But even if he's not, Samaje Perine is gone. I mean, Chase Brown is in the mix for significant snaps here if Mixon goes down. Your thoughts between Roschon Johnson versus Chase Brown? Which one of these guys do you like better, Pat?
In every rookie mock and every actual rookie draft I've seen so far, Eric, Roschon Johnson has gone ahead of Chase Brown, and sometimes by a good bit. I think I actually prefer Chase Brown. Like, I've got him one spot higher. It's not that I'm not high on Roschon Johnson. I like him a lot. I mean, I've talked to, Alex Dunlap of Roster Watch, who is really, lives in Austin and, does stuff covering the Texas football team. And he said, Roschon Johnson is just this beloved figure within the Longhorns football program. And just like the reverence for him, even as a pure backup to Bijan, is immense in Austin. So I'm high on him. I think he's good. But like Chase Brown, that guy averaged like 27 carries a game for the Fighting Illini last fall. I mean, he was, as you know, from being a Wisconsin guy, Eric, Brett Bielema likes to work his running backs pretty hard. And we saw it like with Monte Ball and some other guys.
Well, we saw it when Bielema went to Arkansas. The same thing happened there.
Yes. So, we know that if maybe the Bengals do decide to release Mixon, Brown is like capable of carrying a heavy load. I know he didn't have the best Senior Bowl week. He had some problems with drops and he was getting blown up in pass blocking. But man, I didn't expect him to be as fast as he was at the combine.
Yeah.
4.4 speed. We know he can take punishment, like carrying that heavy workload at Illinois. I'm really intrigued by him. And, I like him just a little bit more than Roschon Johnson because I can sort of see a plausible path to him being possibly an impact guy in year 1.
Chase Brown right now is the running back 59, going on average at the 1409 in Fantasy Pros Championship drafts, which you can register for and play at myffpc.com. Since the draft, Pat, he has gone as high as the 1109. I would expect his ADP to go up a little bit. As long as we don't have clarity on this Mixon thing, I think Chase Brown's draft stock is going to continue to ascend. We'll be following that situation there. So both those players, Johnson and Brown, a lot to like there, and maybe even more so with Chase Brown. I'm going to put my Packers hat on figuratively here. I heard a lot of people who follow the Packers, talk about Jalen Hyatt, how they thought Jalen Hyatt was going to be this great pick for Green Bay if they get the opportunity to draft him. I was kind of down on Hyatt because I think the offense that he played in Tennessee and the routes he ran there, I didn't get a really good feel for how that would translate to the NFL. Jaden Reed was a guy I kind of liked, and I kind of liked for the Packers. I don't necessarily know if I liked him in the second round to the Packers because, Green Bay has these certain thresholds as far as you got to be this high, you got to weigh this much for being a receiver. And Jaden Reed is below both of those. And I know a lot of people who are disappointed that the Packers didn't take Hyatt. They said, well, if you're going to break your threshold for Jaden Reed, why wouldn't you break him for Jalen Hyatt? How do you handle these guys in your dynasty rookie drafts? I think Hyatt might have the higher ceiling. The Packers' track record in second-round receivers is really, really good under Ted Thompson and Brian Gutekunst. Can you give me your thoughts on these two players?
Yeah, I mean, I've got them kind of like with Roschon Johnson and Chase Brown, with Sam Laporta and Michael Mayer. I've got Hyatt and Reed basically side by side. And, I think I've got Hyatt one spot higher, but, I would not be aghast if anyone took Reed earlier than Hyatt. And you made a good point that with the offense, the Josh Heupel offense at Tennessee, it's really hard to get a read on like not only Hyatt and Cedric Tillman, the receivers there, but also Hendon Hooker, because that is a simplified offense. Like Heupel makes things as easy as possible for his quarterback. And it was a real basic route tree for Hyatt and Tillman. And a lot of people think Hyatt might just be kind of a one-trick pony. But man, the trick is pretty good. That dude can fly. And, he can leave defenders in the dust. And, I'm anxious to see how he's used with the Giants. And I'm very anxious to see how the Packers use Jaden Reed. Because the nice thing about Reed, I mean, as you know, our cupboards were pretty bare at wide receiver.
Yep.
It was Christian Watson. It was Romeo Doubs. And a couple of UDFA practice squad type guys, Bo Melton, and I can't even think of the other guy.
Jeff Cotton was
Jeff Cotton. Thank you. Yes.
And then they took Samori Toure in the 7th round last year too.
Yeah, and I forgot about Toure. Yeah. He's still on the roster.
They're easily forgettable guys at this point.
So not a surprise that we drafted 3 receivers, but Reed is the headliner of the group we drafted. And it's possible he gets a pretty significant target share right away. I got to ask though, Eric, where are you on Jordan Love? Because we've had some time to think about this. I mean, the one time he was asked to be a starter when Rodgers had COVID in 2021, pretty disastrous start in Kansas City where, a game where our defense played exceptionally well. And really all he needed to do was string a couple completions together, pick up a few first downs. We could have won that game. So I'm still, maybe I'm just holding it against Brian Gutekunst, that 2020 draft that I thought went so poorly, taking Love, trading up for him instead of taking a receiver. I don't know. I'm a little concerned that the quality of targets for those Packers pass catchers isn't going to be great coming from Jordan Love, who's, still 3 years into his career, completely untested, basically.
I've shared this on this show and several other shows about Jordan Love. So let's talk about this Chiefs game first, because I think what people forget about that was there was 30-mile-an-hour crosswinds that game. And Love, yes, he made some poor decisions. That's inarguable. But if you look at his stat line, while it wasn't great, he had a 69.5 quarterback rating. You look across to the other side of the field, you have Mr. All-World, future Hall of Fame, first ballot Patrick Mahomes. He had a 73.5 quarterback rating. He did not play well that game. And I got to believe that the wins definitely had a lot to do with that. I kind of throw out the Lions games because he was working with mostly backups that game. And then the Eagles game, I don't know what to make of this because he looked so good in like a quarter and a half or whatever it was. And Darius Slay said on his podcast that the Eagles were licking their chops and they were coming after him hard and Love was picking them apart. But then Love, I think, was just recently asked about that game. And he's like, they're just playing soft coverage against me. It was. So I don't know what to think. And so I think this goes back to my whole point. I've drafted Jordan Love in a few redraft leagues already this year. For anybody who tells you, let me share this story real quick. As long as it's a Packers show, right? I was sitting in a bar. Actually, it was a pizza place, but I was sitting at the bar in this pizza place a couple of months ago. And these people behind me were talking about Aaron Rodgers and, oh, is he going to be traded? What's going to happen? And they said, well, even if he's gone, they need to get a new quarterback because this new guy, this Love guy, he ain't it. And I never do this, Pat, but I wanted to turn around and say, excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear you. You said Jordan Love isn't it. What are you basing that on exactly? Anybody who says that this guy is going to be the next great Packers quarterback or the next big bust at quarterback, we're guessing. We are speculating. We just don't know. We have nothing to work. We're not at practice every single day. We're not the front office. We're not, we can listen to what his teammates and the coaching staff say and say, yeah, he's going to ball out. I happen to think he's going to be a pretty good quarterback. I don't think he's going to be a future Hall of Famer or anything like that, but I think he's going to be all right. That's sort of where I stand on Jordan Love. And until his ADP starts climbing, I'll still continue to draft him as a second quarterback. What scares me on this team is you are looking at by far and away the youngest wide receiver room in the NFL right now. And historically, Pat, I don't know, there's got to be somebody, maybe Pro Football Focus or somebody could do a study on this. What like if they're the youngest wide receiver room of all time. And to me, the talent is there. I don't know if you are necessarily setting up Jordan Love for success with all these young receivers and, quite frankly, all these young tight ends as well. I think that's the biggest concern I have about Love at this point. His ADP still says draft me, and I'll look it up in a second. It's not very high. I think he's going to be okay, but it's just speculation.
Yeah, it's crazy that every wide receiver they have is a first year or a second year guy.
Yeah.
Like I don't ever remember another team having a wide receiver group that young.
I don't, listen, the Packers went 8-9 last year and it was super depressing to watch. They might go 8-9 this year, but it's going to be super exciting to watch with all this because we just don't know what's going to happen. The end result could be the same, but it could be a lot more fun, and we'll be following that for sure. As we get more and more, like in a rookie mini camp and then OTAs and then training camp, I think we'll get some more. We'll get some more intel on Jordan Love right now. But you're kind of drafting blind. Doesn't really matter. He's quarterback 23 at the 1804, so you can get him for free in Fantasy Pros Championship drafts at myffpc.com. Let's talk about Michael Wilson. I don't know a whole lot about this guy. Can you kind of clue me in on what type of player he could be and where you would take him in a rookie draft?
Man, so he is really interesting. Like he played 14 games over the last 3 years. He has, a Kadarius Toney type injury couple of seasons where he has just basically had a potpourri of injuries. But man, like really interesting package because he's 6'1.5", 216 pounds. Like he's pretty big. He's fairly fast. He's fairly athletic. Thor Nystrom, who I referenced earlier, our in-house college football and NFL draft analyst, was like, he was at the Senior Bowl. And when Wilson was running his routes, Thor said that there were some cuts he made that were just so violent. Like there were oohs and ahs from the crowd of like how, he just totally shook guys with these violent cuts. Maybe that has something to do with why he's getting hurt a lot, but really feisty, competitive for the ball, good at contested catches. So there's a lot to like here, especially if the Cardinals do eventually cut ties with DeAndre Hopkins. We know there are going to be probably a lot of negative game scripts for the Cardinals. They're going to be chasing points a lot, although we don't know when Kyler Murray is going to come back. They're probably not going to rush him back if they're running up the white flag on the season, but he is intriguing for sure. And as far as dynasty rankings go, like in a 1 QB league, I'd consider him like in maybe the back half of the second round, and in super flex, maybe right around the 2-3, I shouldn't say turn because it's not a snake draft, but right. Late second, early third.
I think you bring up the Hopkins thing is what we're paying attention to, because if Hopkins moves on, then Wilson is he's not like just some 6th, 7th round throwaway guy. I mean, he's a 3rd round pick. And Thor, you referenced Thor Nystrom. He's actually going to be guest co-hosting next week with me as well. So I'm definitely going to be asking him about Wilson for sure. But this is something that you need to be paying attention to and swing for the home run in your late 2nd round, early 3rd round of your dynasty rookie draft. Back to the Packers here. Luke Musgrave goes in the early 2nd round. Tucker Kraft is the 3rd round pick for Green Bay. Is that the order you draft him for your rookie drafts? Do you like Musgrave better than Tucker Kraft?
It is for me. I mean, I'm intrigued by Musgrave being a 6'6" guy who runs like a gazelle, like a 4.6 40. And but this is not a unanimous opinion in the among the fantasy pro staff. 4 likes Tucker Kraft more as a pass catcher. Derek Brown, who I mentioned earlier, he also prefers Tucker Kraft. So I do like Musgrave more, but we should at least acknowledge the possibility that he's not going to be the Packers' leading pass catching tight end.
I had a buddy of mine that I went to high school with. His brother played college football with Tucker Kraft's dad at South Dakota State. So they've seen Tucker Kraft up close. Like is Tucker Kraft now, the Packers pick. They say he's an absolute animal. And I've seen some of this film where he is just destroying guys. And granted, you consider the competition, but destroying guys with his blocking. His blocking is ahead of Luke Musgrave right now. And I think that's the concern is like, if Kraft is this far advanced in his blocking over Musgrave, who's going to be on the field more to start? Probably going to be Kraft. And I guess here's that last thing I want to make about Musgrave. I read a lot of pundits out there talking about Musgrave and, well, he's got to stay healthy. If he can stay healthy, he can do this. I've tried to research this, and maybe you more than me, Pat, but like he had one knee injury, right? Like it's not like been this cavalcade of awful injuries for him. It was one knee injury. And it was significant. Yeah, I agree. But it's not like he's made a paper or anything like that. I think there's a lot to like about Musgrave.
Yeah, he does not have a Michael Wilson type checkered injury history. So, but it'll be interesting. I know what you mean. Like the highlights for Tucker Kraft are just phenomenal. They're off the hook. But like, highlights you can cut up highlights to make any player look pretty good. And I did not watch a lot of South Dakota State Jackrabbits games last season. So I can't really tell you, give you the full picture of the player, but I'm definitely intrigued. Like it's going to be really fun to watch Packers preseason games.
Yeah.
In August. Like I can't wait for that.
I always tell everybody I want, especially the last few years, I'm like, put all these starters in bubble wrap. I don't need to see Bakhtiari and Rodgers and all these guys out there. But like now I've totally flipped it. Like, yeah, Love needs to be out there. And all these young guys like Watts, they need reps, they need to get these reps in. So I'm totally on board with the Packers, playing all these young guys because I think they'll need it. Last thing I'll say here, Mercedes Lewis, I think, is moving on from Green Bay. I don't think he'll be back with the Packers, although I think it'd be nice to get some veteran leadership in that tight end room. But he often blocked. He was sort of like a glorified 6 lineman for Green Bay last couple of years. And I saw in Darnell Washington a guy who was the best blocking tight end in this draft. And I saw what he could do, all the things that Mercedes Lewis could do, I thought he'd be able to do. Plus, I think there was a certain athleticism that he brought to the table in catching the football that got me very excited. I thought the Packers were actually going to take him in the second round instead of Musgrave. And then he fell. And then he fell. And then he fell some more. Finally, the Steelers grabbed him at the end of the third round. What happened to him? And should we be concerned that the NFL teams, seemingly most of them, passed on him 3 times? Should we be concerned about drafting him in an FFPC tight end premium rookie draft?
Yeah, it's funny. I did a 3-round mock draft the week before the actual NFL draft with Thor and Derek Brown. And I was drafting for the Packers and I took Darnell Washington in the second round. I was pretty pleased with myself. Like I thought that would have been a real logical pick. And the Mercedes Lewis comp is just perfect, Eric. I mean, like that's kind of what he is, like this really terrific blocker who, might not be great as a pass catcher, might not be a prolific, Antonio Gates, Travis Kelce type, but, Lewis in his earlier days was a pretty useful, he had double-digit touchdowns one year early in his career with the Jaguars. Maybe it's possible that NFL teams just sort of didn't value like a really elite blocking tight end who was sort of a mixed bag. And I know Thor says that when you really watch the film of Darnell Washington, as remarkable a physical specimen as he is, never really did a lot after the catch. Not a lot of instances on tape of him high pointing balls or making spectacular catches, although I know he made one at the combine that really wowed people. So maybe it's that they just didn't value that Mercedes Lewis type as a first or second round talent. But then there were also the rumors about an old foot injury that, maybe there were some medical red flags. So that might've been more about it than what kind of player he profiles as, that scared people off. That the medical thing might have played into it, but like, I know it was an old foot injury that he played through last year, so I'm not sure why it alarmed so many people.
And is it affecting where you I don't even know where you have him ranked among your tight ends in your rookies ranking?
Pretty far down. I mean,
okay.
Pretty buried with he's buried with Freiermuth. Like, I just don't think he's going to ever really be an elite pass catching tight end. So I'm not too interested in him for fantasy.
I am very interested into Dynasty rookie draft tips, strategy, and tricks from you, Pat Fitzmaurice, which we're going to get into here shortly. We're going to step out and take our last break of the show. When we come back, we're going to talk about what you should be doing in your rookie drafts. If you're drafting in the FFPC rookie drafts this coming weekend, should be drafting for need or talent. Does your draft strategy change after the first round passes? We're going to talk with Pat about that as well. Pat Fitzmaurice from Fantasy Pros. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
The Detroit Lions select Sam Laporta, tight end, Iowa.
Had to go with your boy Sam Laporta there to pair with TJ Hawkinson.
Sammy, I couldn't double down on rookie tight ends. I think that's taking it a little too far.
This could be one of the most exciting rookie tight end classes in a while, just based on the archetypes of these guys, and the Dalton Kincaids and the Sam Laportas. Obviously, Green Bay drafted two themselves with Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. So after Kincaid, I would say is probably the consensus with tight ends. Like, who do you like as far as the best ball, like end of best ball? Do you like Laporta, or is there anybody else you like more?
I do like Laporta. We're looking for guys that can be a top 2 target on their team. So any path, any argument you could make, right? So you can make the argument that Dalton Kincaid is going to be a top 2 target with after Stephon Diggs. You can make an argument that with Jamison Williams suspended, now Sam Laporta is just going to play straight up wide receiver. He looks like a wide receiver. Why can't he line up out wide at split end, right? It's like Marvin Jones and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I would also throw another name in the ring, and I don't mind, since we're doing this for the fans, for the kids. He's still on the board. Luke Musgrave on your Packers. They're not super loaded at wide receiver. We like the guy Reed they drafted, but you never know. So why can't Luke Musgrave be a big slot? In fact, they drafted 2 tight ends, Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. Tucker Kraft is more of an inline guy. They might just go 2 tight ends right away. Tucker Kraft inline, Luke Musgrave in the slot. Why can't he be a target monster for Jordan Love? So those are the guys, those are the conditions that you need for a rookie tight end to succeed. They need to not only be the best pass catching tight end on the team, but a top 2 pass catcher on the team outright. That's how you get Kyle Pitts. Evan Ingram as a rookie was top 5 because Odell Beckham Jr. hurt his knee 4 weeks into the year. So that's the formula. We're looking for guys that can actually be a top target right away. Otherwise, we're playing the sit and wait long-term game, which is what you're doing with guys like Michael Mayer.
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
23 minutes until the top of the hour when we give way to Garrett Price and the Nerd Herd. Dynasty Nerds coming up at the top of the hour here, ladies and gentlemen, only on the Better Sports Network. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Pat Fitzmaurice, the managing editor for Fantasy Pros and Betting Pros, joining me tonight. Hey, and Better fans who are watching this, you should know this. You can have the Better Sports Network newsletter emailed to you every single day. The only place to get our daily Better Bet Plus exclusive offers, program alerts, special events, and of course, our top moments. Register for free right now at bettersports.com. Pat, we are counting down the minutes until you have is this your first rookie draft of the season?
Second. We have the Fantasy Pros Invitational Dynasty League, a slow draft that has been ongoing. I think like we're in the end of the 4th round, and I had traded out of the first couple of rounds in that one. So this will be my first one where I'm actually involved.
So, and you said you traded out of the first round in this round.
I did.
This one too. So what's the first pick you have tonight?
206. I've got 206 and 209.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about this. And I have some thoughts on this, and maybe it's obvious, but I feel like anybody who's watching this, getting ready for the rookie draft, so let's do an all-out blitz on this. Should you be drafting for need? Or should you be drafting for talent? And I'll give you an example. oftentimes I have pretty good receivers. My receiver core is usually really good for my dynasty teams. My running back core, usually not so bueno. I don't know if I just focus on receivers and tight ends too much, but my running backs, I usually need players here. If I am sitting at like the 103, the 104, the 105, should I be, reaching on a guy like Zach Charbonnet, or should I be looking at drafting guys like Jackson Smith-Njigba or Dalton Kincaid or Jordan Addison, stuff like that? How do you handle weighing drafting for need versus talent for rookie drafts, Pat?
Well, I feel like I'm going to speak out of both sides of my mouth with this answer, Eric, because I can give you a real tangible example here. And one of the reasons I did trade out of the first round with this, I did want to recoup a 2024 second round pick that I traded away. And, but part of it was that I'm pretty loaded at wide receiver in this particular league. And I figured that at 109 in a super flex, that was where the first round receivers were going to fall. It's going to be like Bijan, Gibbs, the three quarterbacks, and then I figured 106 to 109 was going to be in some order: Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, and Quentin Johnston. Mm-hmm. And rather than being locked into one of those, I just, I found one of the teams in my league that's pretty weak at wide receiver. Told them what I was thinking, that, that's kind of the wide receiver sweet spot. You need wide receivers. I'd rather move back and pick up a second next year. He totally agreed. It was a very easy negotiation. So maybe in that sense, I was sort of playing it positionally, but generally I think it makes sense to go with the talent and, like talent over need. And I do think, best ball drafts are a little differently because you can't make moves in season, but in managed leagues, whether it's redraft or dynasty, I think positional balance is like the most overrated thing in fantasy. You can make trades, go with the talent, go with the value on the draft board, and worry about positional balance later on.
When you talk about the positional drop off at the 109 and Superflex, you're including those quarterbacks. Where is the positional drop off for like non-Superflex leagues this year? In other words, if you want a real difference maker in the first round, and you want it to be a running back, receiver, or tight end, what part of the first round do you have to be in to make that happen?
Oh, man. I mean, I feel like it's pretty much after those two running backs, after the four wide receivers who went in the first round, and then after Dalton Kincaid. So that's basically
top seven, right?
Yeah. And I mean, like, there's some guys I like, of course, after that. I'm a definite Devon A-Chain enthusiast. But, like, still, though, I don't believe that he's any sort of sure thing who deserves to be grouped with those seven guys who are pretty good bets based on the draft capital and, just the talent profiles.
Let me ask you this. Let's say those top seven picks off the board are the two running backs, the 4 first-round receivers, and then Kincaid, right?
Yeah.
You're sitting at 108. Would you take Devin A-Chain, single quarterback league? Would you take Devin A-Chain or would you take Anthony Richardson?
I'd take A-Chain.
You would?
Yeah, and okay. And I understand that Richardson, could be like have a Jalen Hurts type impact at quarterback eventually, but still in a one quarterback league, just supply and demand. I tend not to be too interested in the rookie quarterbacks in one QB leagues. I just generally acquire my quarterbacks other ways, right, in one QB dynasty.
And I'm sort of the same way, but I feel like Anthony Richardson might be a bit of a unicorn as far as his skill set.
Yeah, quite possible. And I mean, like, that's the thing we sort of have to factor in, the possibility he, never quite lives up to the billing as a passer and, winds up being a guy like, man, the name Tim Tebow flashed into my head, but no way is he ever going to be that poor a passer. I don't know. I have to get that name out of my head. But yeah, like, maybe we don't see him fulfill the promise as a passer, but we're still going to get a lot of rushing goodies from him, right, no question. So, I mean, I don't think it would be foolish at all for anyone to do that. Maybe I'm just a little too over my too head over heels in love with A-Chain.
Well, let's talk about A-Chain, because I was kind of on him a little bit. Like, I think I drafted him in one redraft league prior to the NFL draft. But I don't think I have him in any other spots. He goes to Miami, which, yeah, Mike McDaniel, that running game, perfect. And yeah, Jeff Wilson, Raheem Mostert, those guys are just kind of Jags at this point of their career. So the opportunity's there. For me, and maybe I'm being a sizist here. I love the speed from A-Chain. I just don't know what the long-term ceiling is for him in the NFL. I don't know if he's ever, again, getting back to is this ever guy ever going to have a top 5 running back season, top 10 season? And I'm not necessarily sure I'm seeing it from A-Chain, but perhaps you can guide me towards the light here.
Oh, I mean, I totally get the sizes thing, and I tend to be like that myself, Eric, because the hit rates for sub 190-pound running backs are just not great, and A-Chain's like 188 pounds. But maybe it was because I fell so hard for him. Like, I've watched a lot of Texas A&M the last couple of years just because I enjoyed watching him so much, and he averaged 19.7 carries a game last year, and factor in the receptions, and he was touching it like 23.6 or something times a game. And I get it because Texas A&M's offense was pretty bad. And they ran him in between the tackles a lot more than you would expect for a 5'9", 188-pound back. He's actually got pretty good contact balance, and Jimbo Fisher has made this point that he's not just about the speed. He is an all-around football player who happens to have world-class speed.
Right.
And like the contact balance he has, and like the toughness and the way he can kind of slither through tight spaces sort of reminds me of Warwick Dunn, who was, fantasy relevant for more than a decade and handled some pretty big workloads. So, you mentioned it, Mostert's 31, and Mostert did have like a mid-career breakout when Mike McDaniel was the running game coordinator for San Francisco, and then was fantasy relevant again last year with Mike McDaniel. I just think this is the right spot, a creative play caller who really values speed. And, the fact that Miami, which everyone loved as far as a potential running back landing spot, that team being the one to get A-Chain, I'm really excited.
So just to reiterate, you would take Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs as your top 2 running backs. But if Charbonnet, Kendre Miller, Tyjae Spears, they're all on the board, you're taking A-Chain over all those guys, right?
I'm taking A-Chain over those guys.
Okay. Now, this brings up an interesting point because we have had previous guest co-hosts on this show, in fact, talk about drafting running backs, receivers, tight ends in the order the NFL drafted them. I think quarterbacks, it's a little bit different because you have a guy like Anthony Richardson that clearly has the best running chops of any of the top 3 that were drafted. It's easy to why you would leapfrog him and take him as the first quarterback off the board. Running backs, receivers, and tight ends, though. Where do you stand on just, the KISS method? Keep it simple, stupid. Let's just draft the running backs, the receivers, and the tight ends in the order the NFL drafted them. I guess you're definitely against it this year for running backs, but that strategy in general, where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big model guy, Eric. Like, I don't do, rookie models or whatever, but I know the guys who do the models, like draft capital is a huge input for them, and it is weighted heavily. And I think it's still, those guys will tell you it's probably the best predictor of NFL success. So while I'm not a slave to draft capital, but, if you're picking a 6th rounder over a 2nd rounder, you're probably holding on your priors a little too tightly. And, I'm really interested in Kayshon Boutte, for instance, who had an early breakout as like a teenaged freshman at LSU playing against top competition. And, things didn't go well his last year at LSU, didn't get along with Brian Kelly, et cetera. And, slipped into the 6th round of the draft. Now, I think he's an interesting guy, and I just took him in the 4th round of a rookie draft and actually traded up and traded a 4th round rookie pick next year to be in a position to jump some people to take him. But man, I think there's probably an 80% chance he just never fires and is out of the league. But I think if he hits, he's going to hit pretty big. And, maybe Bill Belichick is a guy who can get him to fall in line. But let's face it, I'm not taking Boutte ahead of Jalen Hyatt or Jaden Reed or any of these day 2 picks. I might like him, but I'm not bold enough in my own evaluation to, be blind to the draft capital.
I know a lot of things have happened to Kadarius Toney since the Giants drafted him in the first round, but I remember that guy falling like a rock in rookie drafts. And I'm sitting on the clock and I'm like, God, this first round wide receiver is still on the board. Why is that? And is now the right moment to strike? And I think I did in a couple of my leagues. And I'm obviously excited. We'll see what happens in Kansas City with a full year with Patrick Mahomes. That's going to be fun. Certainly, there's not a whole lot of spots you'd rather have him in this year. But then it works the other way too. Like in a couple of my drafts, I play in some private leagues with a lot of the FFPC high stakes players in like my fantasy league and stuff. And they just like there's no sleepers, right? Like everybody just gets gobbled up. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, everybody else is letting Anthony Schwartz fall to me. I might as well take Schwartz because he was like a second round pick or whatever it was. And who was the other guy? No, Schwartz was the third rounder. Tutu Atwell was the second rounder for the Rams. And I'm like, yeah, this guy's like 5'2", 120 pounds, but he was a second round pick. Like I have to, at some point, I got to start respecting draft capital. Now those two haven't worked out, but obviously it worked out for some Toney owners.
Now, Eric, not only are you a fellow Wisconsin guy, you might be my fantasy doppelganger because in this league where we're about to draft, I have Kadarius Toney, who also fell into the second round. I thought the pick was a bad one for the Giants when they made it, but he was sitting there for 206 or 207 or wherever I was drafting. No, maybe it was actually, I think I'd made it to the championship game the year before. So I think I was 211.
Wow.
And Toney fell all the way. I'm like, this guy got picked in the first round. I got to take him here.
Yeah.
And I also had Anthony Schwartz on that team too. So since released, but I did draft Anthony Schwartz.
Here's what we know: nothing is ever perfect, right? You just gotta roll with the punches. Speaking of rolling with the punches, I feel like every year, not just this year in rookie drafts, every year, the first round is usually chock with fantasy goodness, or at least a good chunk of the first round is chock with fantasy goodness. Then it kind of gets into whatever at that point. In the second round and the third round, do you ever change your draft strategy where you're like, okay, this guy was drafted first, but I don't really like him. I don't see really a path to success for him. This guy who was drafted in the fourth round, I don't think he's going to hit, but man, if he does, we're talking about a massive hit here, and you start swinging for the home runs later in the second round and the third round. Do you find yourself doing that?
Yeah, I mean, occasionally, the Kayshon Boutte is maybe a good example, although I think I got him at 401 in this draft the other night. But yes, I mean, I'll do that. And maybe in the later it gets into a draft, the more willing I am to try to fill needs on my team. Okay, I am strong at wide receiver, weak at running back. I don't need to take a wide receiver here in the third round. If I'm going to throw a dart, I might as well throw it at a position where I need to land a dart.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I will definitely sort of loosen my, my attention to draft capital the later I go in a draft too. Then
it's all about getting your guys, right?
Yeah, it is. And the high upside is appealing. Tucker Kraft is a good one. I mean, maybe there aren't going to be a lot of third round tight ends who are sexy to people, but if this guy hits, he could hit pretty big and maybe play ahead of Musgrave and be a starting tight end for a team that needs a tight end who can catch passes.
Let's talk about the last thing I want to get to here with you tonight. I know we've talked about some sleepers and some fades in rookie drafts already for it. We talked about Devin Achane, who I know you like quite a bit. We'll save the fades for a second. Are there any other sleepers? And trust me, the people you're going to be drafting against here in about 10 minutes, they're not watching. So feel free to share all the information that you can with us, Pat. Who are your rookie draft sleepers for FFPC drafts this weekend? Rookie.
Yeah, I mean, I do like Kayshon Boutte. So I'll just a little more on him. I mean, he did have a nice breakout freshman season at LSU where I think at the end of his freshman season, he goes for 3 straight 100-yard games to end. And the last game was a 308-yard multi-touchdown game against Ole Miss. And then he starts his sophomore season really doing well and injures himself after 6 games. And then his third and final season was kind of a disaster. Didn't get along with Brian Kelly, et cetera, et cetera. So falls into the 6th round, didn't test well at the combine. But I think he's one of those guys like Jarvis Landry or Robert Woods who just isn't a tester, but like good route runner and really good after the catch. That's where Booty is pretty special. So I like him. Man, some of the fades, I guess we talked a little bit about Jalen Hyatt. Like maybe people are still in on him. I'm not quite as high on him. Tyjae Spears, who a lot of people liked early in the process, but he lands behind Derrick Henry. And now we find out like he doesn't have an ACL or like he's got this knee thing. And I mean, I just have flashbacks to Jay Ajayi, who actually did give us a couple, flashes of fantasy utility early in his career, but it wound up being a really short career. So, I won't say he's totally off my draft board, but I don't suspect I'm going to land him anywhere. And a guy I feel like is going to be picking up steam because of the landing spot is Rashee Rice. Now, like, I'm intrigued by a second rounder who goes to Kansas City, but like, how many times are we going to fall into the Kansas City trap where like we get way too overboard on these guys? Like everyone loved Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and he's done nothing but break hearts. Everyone loves Sky Moore last year, and people were routinely drafting Sky Moore ahead of Jahan Dotson, even though he went around later. And, Sky Moore just never fired as a rookie. Now, maybe he fires in year 2, but so far the returns have been pretty depressing. And Jahan Dotson, I think, like he was hurt, missed some time, but we saw why he was a first-round rookie. Like he played well when he was in there. So
he was another guy that slid in rookie drafts too, Jahan
Yeah.
Dotson.
Yeah, definitely. And that was one of those things where people thought they were maybe smarter than the draft capital. And, draft capital turned out to tell the tale.
Pat Fitzmaurice at Fitz_FF. You check out all his work at Fantasy Pros, Betting Pros. Wait, is that the best? Where's the best way to consume more Pat Fitzmaurice content?
Yeah, stalk my timeline at Fitz_FF. Pretty much, any article I have on Fantasy Pros, I'm going to post it there. So, you can check me out there. But I definitely encourage people to visit FantasyPros.com because, Dynasty, Best Ball, Redraft, we've got new articles going up every day. And, there's always some sort of goodie to be had for our fantasy consumers.
Yeah, and Derek Brown's been on this show. I said Thor Nystrom's coming up. We've had you on tonight. It's very, very exciting time for Fantasy Pros and the FFPC. Pat, thank you so much for joining me, man. We'll have to do this again sometime. This was so much fun.
This was a blast, Eric, and I hope the next time we're talking together, there's beer and bratwurst involved.
Oh, yes. That is going to happen for sure. Pat Fitzmaurice, ladies and gentlemen, at Fitz_FF. That will conclude tonight's proceedings. I want to thank Pat and, of course, our wonderful producer, Anthony Rivera. Next Thursday, 7/6 Central, Thor Nystrom from Fantasy Pros will join me, along with a special guest, including we'll have Thor on, but we're also going to have another guest co-host for the second hour. So be paying attention to that. MyFFPC.com, win $1 million in the inaugural Fantasy Pros Championship. Just a $350 entry fee over at MyFFPC.com. Remember, if you register by June 1st and draft by June 15th, you will get a free $35 FFPC credit to your account, and you can do that up to 3 times as well. That is the way to do it. Dynasty startups are popping off Saturday morning. Register now, MyFFPC.com. No Dynasty League has ever folded with the FFPC, and there's well over 1,200 of them. That's myffpc.com. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. We'll be back next week. Don't go anywhere. Dynasty Nerds with Garrett Price. The Nerd Herd is up next.